Hey Gary, hey Patrick.
Hey, what's going on, Edward? By the way, do you prefer Edward or Ed? I've been kind of going back and forth.
Oh, that's good. Most people call me Ed, but I don't mind either.
Okay, all right. I might just go back and forth. So hopefully that
No
doesn't
worries.
drive
Yeah.
you crazy. Yeah.
How's it going, Gary?
I'm doing well. Patrick, do you prefer Patrick or Jason?
Ooh, Jason. I don't know, man. Jason. See, I used to have a roommate named Jason from West Virginia. So yeah, I don't think I don't feel like a Jason to myself. So I guess Patrick would be better. Kind of
Fair
like
enough.
the starfish. Patrick like the
Sure.
starfish. That's what I'm
And,
going to go
and
with.
Gary like the snail. So we'll just roll with that.
Oh,
Okay,
that's
there you go.
amazing.
Sorry, it's just a question I ask all Patricks. So nothing personal. Patrick or Jason. That's all. So
You
what's
guys
going
have
on,
any
gents?
Labor Day weekend plans?
Not much here. We're going to try to hit the beach, but it looks like it's going to be kind of rainy here in the Northeast. But, on Monday, we're probably going to have a little local cookout with some friends and neighbors. And, it'll be all right. You guys?
Yeah, probably going to the local fair, and that's about it. We're gonna just hang back and relax for the weekend.
So tomorrow I'm going to my friend Ryan's house, and he goes by the name Raider Ryan. And he's like, I think he won like the contest last year for the biggest Raider fan. And so he's cooking. He's doing a 24-hour brisket. So I'm going to go there and have some of that brisket because it's really good. I'm really good at cooking steak and roast and most roasts, but I'm just a novice at brisket. I don't really know how to cook brisket properly, but he does. And this is also the draft party, by the way. So drafting the fantasy team tomorrow. I prefer survivor pools to fantasy just because it's just easier. It's less time commitment, but I kind of got bullied into this fantasy league, and I get free brisket out of it, so I'm down.
That sounds like a deal, man. Please mail some to me.
Yeah, you got it, man.
Yeah, I'm a sucker for some good brisket. That's like my favorite.
Nice. Edward, what about you? Any plans?
Yeah, no, like I said, just going to the fair. We have like
Fair.
a little local fair here. They have like all that good fair stuff. They have like fun little competitions, and then all the fair food. And yeah, my son's like 2 years old, so he'll just have fun running around, and just exploring.
Nice. Yeah, enjoy that. Enjoy this time. Let the kids
Yeah,
go
yeah,
do that.
thanks.
It's great to live vicariously through them.
Oh yeah, it's a ton of fun. He's a wild guy. It's a lot of work. But yeah. Any Bitcoin news that you guys have seen recently that is on your mind?
I mean, do you have something, Patrick, that you wanted to share? Because I had something I was going to mention. It's not really news, but it's just something I was working on.
Yeah, nothing off the top of my head. Go ahead, Gary.
A friend of mine who lives close to me, a really smart guy and very thoughtful guy. I was talking to him about Bitcoin for the last couple months, and he's very sympathetic to the Bitcoin position, from a philosophical perspective and from an investment perspective, but he's just not into it, and he'd much prefer to invest in businesses and stocks and other things. Fine, to each their own. He sent me a link to a YouTube guy called Scott Trench. Maybe you've heard of him, and he does something called the Rational Investor's Case Against Bitcoin. And I listened to it, and to Mr. Trench's credit, I thought he made. He presented the case for Bitcoin maximalists very well. Most of the time, arguments that I hear against Bitcoin, the case for what we would argue for Bitcoin is not presented well, and there are a lot of straw men. But he really presented it well. He clearly did his research, clearly understands the arguments, is sympathetic to the arguments, and then he made his case against it. And I've actually, before I got on this Spaces, I was in the middle of typing back an email to my friend where I commend the guy to, for all of his work in understanding Bitcoin, but kind of breaking down his arguments and why I've heard these arguments before and why I disagree with them. And I just think it's worth all of us in the Bitcoin space sometimes to kind of listen to other arguments, especially those well presented, so we can, better strengthen our own or discover flaws in our own. And, just something worth doing. That's all.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, was there like a specific thing that stuck out to you that he pointed out?
No, I mean he made in his arguments against it, he did a lot of the usual stuff. He'll say, well, it's not environmentally friendly.
Yeah.
He made the case that he doesn't think the dollar will imminently collapse, and that was one of my nitpicks of his presentation. I said I don't think any Bitcoin maximalist that I know of has argued that the expansion and adoption of Bitcoin globally is predicated upon a near complete collapse of the US dollar. Many have predicted that would be the case at some point in the future, but not that it's necessary for Bitcoin adoption. So those were a couple things. And just kind of going to more. But again, the guy did it in a very thoughtful way. He wasn't being snarky. He wasn't trying to poo-poo Bitcoin or say the people who were maximalists had bad intentions or that they were crazy or anything. It just I happen to disagree with his points, and I'm just in the middle of typing it back. But again, it's always good to listen to people who disagree and disagree in a thoughtful way.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think that I always try to keep an open mind with people that come in and have criticisms because I don't like to assume that everything we think in the Bitcoin space is 100% correct. I want, if there's a good argument or there's something that we should be concerned about and work to address, then absolutely we should be on top of that. But yeah, there are a lot of times where it is those like uh, those typical like responses that you've heard probably 100 times, and then you go over it and you explain to them, and uh, I totally see what you're saying though. I mean, hopefully you help them out. I'm sure that you have the resources and all that. Patrick, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, first of all, I wanted to double check, make sure I got that. Was it Scott Trench that you
Scott,
said?
yeah, Scott Trench, and his video on YouTube is called "The Rational Investor's Case Against Bitcoin."
Okay, gotcha.
It
All right,
was
I'm
published
gonna.
on. It was
Yeah.
put out on May 3rd, 2024.
Okay. Yeah, I'm curious in listening to it. A lot of times, if it's an anti Bitcoin case, I can't get all the way through it because basically they're arguing against crypto and they're using the exact same arguments that some of us use against crypto, and they're using it, and they're basically lumping Bitcoin in with this, overall thing, which is crypto, and just and they're saying, oh well, this doesn't make any sense, someone's in charge of it or whatever, or this is just they don't want to disclose, it's a security, and it's an undisclosed security where somebody can dump on you, but yeah, if it's a really good reason, look, we want to have reasoned debates with people. If someone is having a good faith argument and they're having a good faith debate, we want to be able to hear those, just for the fact that we want to be able to hone our skills and know how to respond to these. I don't think that the environment is a good argument. I mean, obviously, none of us here think that because that has been debunked so many times over. But yeah, if someone who's not into Bitcoin hears this guy and thinks that it sounds reasonable, we need to have a good retort to that argument. But yeah, I'm going to look at that video 100%. And I see Ben in the audience down there. So what's up, Ben?
Hey, Ben. Sorry, if he's just listening in today, that's totally fine too.
Yeah, I think he might just be listening for now. I think he was saying he could he'll speak when he has some free time. But yeah, I think that's a huge problem I've noticed with people that I guess call them like no coiners, that see the Bitcoin space and then also see cryptos and like the broader space, Ethereum, Solana, whatever you see, and they assume that these are all the same thing, and they assume that that all the networks work exactly the same way and that they just have different names, and that's very untrue, obviously, to people that are aware that just the consensus algorithms are different, like proof of work versus proof of stake, and the coin issuance is completely different. But people from the outside looking at it go, oh, there's just all these cryptos and they have all these different names and there's these different prices, so let me just buy up some cheap one. And oh, if I see something in the news about this one crypto, the guy getting maybe like the founder of that crypto getting arrested, they assume that that's the case for every other crypto, or Bitcoin included. And that's something that we, as educators in Bitcoin, attempt to clarify. But yet it's very common that people will get misled by the news that they see, and it's written by people that also don't know what they're talking about. So yeah, it doesn't really help our case, but
Oh yeah, I've heard that the founder of Bitcoin is in federal prison. He was on trial. He was in the news, and they thought Sam Bankman-Fried was the was the founder of Bitcoin. Oh, they caught the founder of
oh
Bitcoin.
no,
Yeah,
Sure.
seriously, I heard that. I heard people saying that.
Of course, and there are so many bad arguments out there against it. But this guy who I was mentioning, he gets that it's different from crypto. He, in this first 5 to 10 minutes, it seems he clearly understands many of the arguments being made for it by Bitcoin maxis, and he just argues against it for some of the reasons he lists. Again, I disagree with those arguments, but I do think it's worth trying to engage with the best arguments we're going to find against it, rather than the low hanging fruit of people who think, well, it's just like somebody else. Well, Bitcoin's a centralized thing, and the investors in prison, that sort of thing. Because, like you both said, it's not going to help our arguments in any way, and it's not going to help us uncover areas where we might be missing something. And it's better for us to do it that way.
yeah, for sure. And I think that what I've seen recently, and I'm sure you guys have seen it too, is the people that are criticizing it maybe have some of that fundamental knowledge that, like, okay, yeah, like Satoshi's some anonymous guy, he's not Sam Bankman-Fried. They at least, like, they're able to discern that. They're coming at it and they're saying things like Lightning won't scale, or Bitcoin will never scale, and like mostly scaling problems. And like, to me, who's was kind of paying attention to the Bitcoin space really well in 2017-ish, when the whole scaling war happened, I didn't really have a side in the fight with that, because I wasn't, like I said, too aware of what the trade-offs were until after the fact, and I wasn't running a node, I wasn't mining anything like that. So, but seeing the arguments, it sounds very similar to like the stuff that we're seeing now, and to me that's a little strange, because that just obviously they're not really aware of the history, they're not aware of something that's only 7 years ago, and we have very clear market results of Bitcoin Cash versus Bitcoin in the market just completely being destroyed. And no one's buying Bitcoin Cash. The market is like a complete fraction of what Bitcoin's is, and yet people are still saying things like we need bigger blocks, or like it won't scale with the blocks this size, or fees are a problem. And these are all these same tired arguments. And I don't know if you guys have seen that, or if you guys have heard specific arguments around Lightning or scaling that stick out to you that maybe we could work on to I guess like address, and just like maybe be more aware of, like, that this is what people are thinking about.
Patrick, you got anything?
Yeah. So, yeah, the common one that we hear, and I've heard a lot of no coiners and also altcoiners make this argument, is something like, "Oh, it's only 7 transactions per second." Now, this meme has kind of been going around for a long time, and I used to kind of think that there was some truth to that, but I mean, if you just see Bitcoin as what it is, a settlement layer. It's not an issue, and it's not true that metric has always been. I think I heard Luke the Dasher say that it was a FUD metric from the beginning. And to kind of back up my claim is if you look at before Bitcoin was even launched, back when Satoshi was discussing Bitcoin kind of as an idea before it was launched, he had just released a white paper and he was kind of putting it out there, and people were kind of commenting on Bitcoin, saying what they thought of it. One of the first arguments against Bitcoin was, oh, no one's going to wait 10 minutes for their transaction to settle, so it can't work. That was like the number one argument right out the gate that somebody made, that no one's going to wait 10 minutes. We're used to instant transactions. And Satoshi's response to that was very telling, because it kind of proves even from before Bitcoin was launched, Satoshi kind of saw Bitcoin as a settlement layer. He said, well, he said you could argue, see, and I'm paraphrasing, obviously. I have the quote somewhere. Maybe I could pull it up, but he said something to the effect of, a credit card transaction takes 90 days to settle, because up until the 90 days after the transaction, you could you could dispute the transaction and you could get it refunded. So yeah, similarly, somebody can do a double spend within 10 minutes. So he said that's not really an argument against Bitcoin. It seemed like even from the very beginning, most Bitcoin Cash people and big blockers like to pretend this quote doesn't exist, because a lot of us, we argue that Bitcoin is a settlement layer. It's a final settlement layer. It's not necessarily the first layer that people are going to transact in, and that's the direction it's going to go. Now, I will say that I don't necessarily think every argument that a big blocker makes is a bad argument. I do agree that adoption does have to include commerce and transactions. So people kind of confuse it. They say, well, the big blockers, their solutions are stupid, therefore all their arguments are stupid. I think no. I think some of their arguments are valid arguments. Their solutions to the argument. So you may have you may be good at pointing out an issue, but if your solution to that issue is stupid, that's a stupid solution. But it doesn't necessarily mean the problem you're citing is a bad one. And I do think that Bitcoin can be more user friendly to be used in commerce, and I think that trying to get more and more people to accept Bitcoin, while that wasn't necessarily a good strategy back in 2013, I think it is a good strategy now. I think we do need to kind of go out there and try to get more and more merchants to start accepting Bitcoin, and try to get some people who are in this hodl for life mindset to start spending their Bitcoin. Now, I agree. Yeah, it wasn't necessarily a good idea to spend your Bitcoin on Expedia, who was just going to dump it for dollars. But if there's a Bitcoin small business out there who is accepting Bitcoin, he's a fellow Bitcoiner. He's a hodler just like you are. I don't think there's anything wrong with supporting that business and spending your Bitcoin there. And I do think that maybe some of this hodl forever mindset. If early Bitcoiners had been hodl forever, none of us would have heard of Bitcoin. It would have been this small project that died, and nobody would have heard of it. So yeah, sorry. Hopefully, I'm not rambling too much, but those are just some thoughts that I have on the transactions per second issue.
Yeah, no, I agree with all that. I just want to make a quick statement that anyone in the audience who wants to come up, ask a question, or just join in the conversation, feel free, and we'll have you up here. But no, the what was interesting too to me is you brought up Satoshi having that statement as far as being a settlement layer. And I remember Hal Finney even saying something along the lines of that it could replace like Fedwire, or like we would have banks that operate on top of Bitcoin. And he was suggesting layers as far back as over 10 years ago, which is very insightful to imagine. And these people that were early into the space, including Satoshi, who made Bitcoin, were they had some idea about like what the trade-offs were with this technology and where it was going. To be able to see it that early, you had to have that knowledge. And there's that famous quote where it's like any argument that you have about Bitcoin was probably already discussed on the Bitcoin talk forums like over 10 years ago. And it's pretty true. And then there's also the saying that goes, Bitcoin isn't for everyone, it's for anyone. And to your point, a lot of big blockers do have some valid critiques of Bitcoin that, not everybody will be able to make layer one transactions. There just isn't enough block space. There's not enough time in how long the blocks are added to the blockchain for that to be a possibility with the human population. But like you said, there has to be a sound solution to that problem. And we can't just say it's a problem and then waive some kind of, half thought through decision like raising the block space, because all that does is bloat the chain size. And then you end up excluding people from being able to run full nodes. And then you could also get into the point where bandwidth becomes an issue with more people with less bandwidth in their internet connections in more remote areas. They can't start taking, a 10, 20, 30 megabyte block every 10 minutes. They just can't download that much. So, having it set the way it is and have it so that we work around those layer one constraints and build higher layers, I think. And I think a lot of people that are in the Bitcoin space agree that layers are the way that we're going to develop Bitcoin. To me, sounds like the right way to go. I don't know, Gary, did you want to add something to it, or Patrick?
I mean, that all sounds great to me. And for those that are just kind of jumping in right now, we kind of got on this tangent by discussing a video that a friend of mine sent me who's a bit of a Bitcoin skeptic. Smart guy, completely understands and gets the position of many people who support Bitcoin and is sympathetic to it, but just believes that this other person whose video we were talking about made good arguments against it. And we're just talking about some of those arguments now. So yeah, I think that was great, covering scalability. That is one of the things that he mentioned. And I actually just pulled up kind of a almost a written transcript of his video. So if you want to kind of turn this into kind of a debunking the points he made spaces, I'm happy to read some of them out. But if you guys want to go in another direction and talk about something else, we could do that too.
Up to you. I mean, I'm more than happy to, we don't have a specific set topic for today, so we can kind of go wherever. I did just want to add really quick, Bull Bitcoin, which we are, as Bitcoin mentors, partnered with, just announced that they are launched in France today, which congrats to those guys over there. Big news. I imagine that was not easy to do. And I know the people in France are probably extremely excited about that. I'm waiting for them to announce that they're in the US, but we have good options here, but they would be a great company to have here.
Yeah, that'd be great.
But yeah, Gary, if you want to go ahead, yeah, let's debunk some stuff. You could even bring up something different, because I think we already touched on some of the scaling stuff, but if there were other points that he brought up,
Yeah, he talked about scalability. We touched on that. One of his other arguments is the finite supply of Bitcoin, and how the last one will be mined in about 2140, and how keys have been lost and are still lost. We all know that. We all understand that. And he writes, sort of in conclusion to that point, quote, "I am not aware of any democratic or capitalist civilization that has endured with a deflationary currency over a long period of time." Anybody want to touch on that?
Yeah, I could touch on that real quickly. I put the Satoshi quote in the nest, so anybody who wants to read it, I found it in my drive. But yeah, I mean, it's not really an issue because a finite money supply is not bad for the economy. The reason why some mainstream economists have this idea is because of what happened in the Great Depression. Before the Great Depression, it was thought, this was the belief that the central bankers had before the Great Depression. They thought that when the economy expands, like when we have basically a booming economy, the money supply needs to expand to fulfill that booming economy. And when the economy contracts and when it's in a depression, you need to reduce the money supply to match that economy. This was the belief before the Great Depression. Now, when the Great Depression started, the economy collapsed, and immediately the very first thing the Federal Reserve did is contract the money supply, and that caused really, really high unemployment, like a record on like 25% unemployment, and it was a disaster because, at least in the short term, it made the problem worse, and it caused a deflationary spiral. So now the Federal Reserve forces a contraction of the money supply. It causes the economy to tank. And now, 100 years later, or, almost 100 years later, people are saying that, oh, deflation is bad for the economy because of the Great Depression, not understanding that, no, deflation is actually the natural state of the economy. You actually want things to get more efficient and to be priced less. And this is actually good for the economy. So the argument that if the buying power of money goes up means nobody will ever spend money, that's just not the case. If that was the case, nobody would ever take a loan, because you could buy more now with that money, and then instead of you wouldn't take out a loan to buy something today that is going to be worth less in a year. But people do that all the time. People buy electronic equipment with a loan, which under the economic theory that deflation is bad, that would never happen. You would starve. You would never buy food because you know that the food is going to be less expensive tomorrow. So you just would never buy food. You would never live your life because you know that a year from now things will be much better. It just doesn't make any sense. But but this is because people conflate deflation with a deflationary spiral, which was kind of forced by the Federal Reserve. So I think modern economists to this day still have that belief in their mind that was basically taught to them in colleges and universities, and basically all you had to do was regurgitate that back to the professor to get your A, and it didn't really require any critical thinking to accept.
Ed, you have
Yeah.
anything you want to jump in with?
Yeah. I mean, I see exactly what you're saying. I think you explained it perfectly well there. People that follow modern economics, Keynesianism, they assume that you need inflation in the monetary supply. And like you mentioned, mistake deflation in the currency supply with deflation in the economy, and they're different things. And a deflationary money isn't bad when society and the people that use that money aren't taking out debt, because when you have debt denominated in a currency and that currency becomes more valuable, it's harder to get it and pay off that debt, and that causes people to foreclose, go into bankruptcy, and obviously not a good thing. So in our current society where everything is debt based, like you said, you're taking out debt to buy electronics and whatever. Deflation is really bad. And if you don't have money like Bitcoin that has a capped supply, and you have all this debt, then you're not gonna be able to pay it. So inflation has been the route most governments take that have control of the money printer. They'd rather inflate the money supply, pay it back with cheaper money in the future, and now they wipe their hands clean, and they can say, well, we paid our debt back, even though now everybody's savings are completely devalued.
Yeah.
Hey guys, I just want to jump in there quick, and hey, good to see you guys. I will pipe in whenever I can. Would be a little bit tied up at the moment, but I just want to add to Gary's that question that your buddy was proposing there, is that one thing that I think is overlooked when that kind of argument is made is the speed of transaction, in the sense that any amount of money, so long as it's sufficiently divisible and can move quickly enough, is completely fine to satisfy all the economic needs. So if you're looking at it in the stance of comparing it to gold, I don't think it was a matter of necessarily the limited supply kind of being the issue there. The issue is that it was difficult to move to where it was basically most attractive. But when you're doing something like Bitcoin, we could always add more decimal places and further divide it if we needed to. And on top of that, if there was a need for capital in an area, we don't have to print new capital in order to get in there and get things going, because the rising prices and return on that capital would attract it. And again, with Bitcoin, you can settle around the entirety of the world. There's no geographical limits.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I knew you'd come in with gold, no pun intended, as you always do. The two arguments that I always hear against a quote unquote a deflationary currency, maybe there are better arguments than these two, and there probably are, but these are the two that I happen to hear a lot of, are similar to the one you brought up, where people say, well, if we have more people, if we have more wealth in the world, we need to print more physical dollars or whatever currency to match it, which it's kind of an odd way of looking at money, because like you said, if you need to further divide Bitcoin, you can always add decimal places. That's not a problem. So it's not really a matter of not having enough of this digital or hard currency to be able to satisfy everybody who wants to need it. And the other argument that I always hear, and you touched on this as well, Patrick, is people saying that the idea that people would simply always hoard their Bitcoin or always hoard their gold or whatever it is that they're hoarding, and they'll never actually spend it, and you need to spend in an economy. But that assumes, again, that people are cyborgs or robots, and we never actually have a life to live that we would spend money on. So yes, people will save in a currency or a store of value as long as it's in their best interest to save in it. But at some point, we all need to eat. We all need to drink. We all would like to have a place to live, or a better place if we can afford it, or take a vacation sometime, or engage in other activities that human beings do. And from that, you do eventually need to spend. So the money would be spent. It just might not be thrown around as frivolously as it currently is.
And even just to yes and that a little bit as well too, if you're going to make an argument that deflation is necessarily bad, you'd have to take it, like if you take it for argument ad absurdum. It's like you'd have to explain to me how if my house was free, so I didn't have to worry about that, how that would be a bad situation. Like ultimately, if prices decline and you're making the case is bad, you can just take it to the logical conclusion. Like, okay, if these things, like the apps on our phone, right? If these things essentially go to free, how is that not enriching people's lives, even though denominated in dollars has gone down?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
But I want to add, if anybody on this Spaces has an argument they want to make, please feel free to do so. You're not going to get shunned. You're not going to get scorned. If you have a good argument you want to make against any Bitcoin point, please come up and do so. And we welcome it.
Yeah. And
no, please.
Correct. I believe you mentioned, Gary, the fees, right? Like the scare about the security problem or the fees. Was that one of the things that was?
I don't think it's one of the ones that he mentioned. I mean, he does talk about the scalability and fees to use on chain, but I think Patrick already touched on it. You touched on it as well to a degree, but he mentioned some other things. But no, I think.
Well, I was going to say, for the running out of the block subsidy, I'm not sure if you guys touched on it a bit earlier as well too, but the important thing to remember is the amount of value that you can pack into a Satoshi is unlimited. So it will just adjust. If there is demand for that block space, prices will adjust. And if the miners can't afford to mine at that current rate, then they will unplug, lowering the difficulty. Like the difficulty adjustment is one of the most brilliant aspects of the network, because that's what exactly keeps things going. That essentially miners would just unplug until those that are still profitable or have energy near free cost, it still makes sense for them to continue with the network.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's why I wanted to bring that up at this point, because you get people, not saying that all of them fall into both, but I've seen people that advocate for bigger blocks, but then also start spreading FUD around the security budget and the block subsidy decreasing. And well, how are people going to be profitable mining if the amount of Bitcoin they earn for mining keeps going down? And they're completely contradictory points, because first of all, like we were saying, if you have a capped money supply, the amount of value that can be represented in a single unit of that money can be unlimited, and we can always add more decimal places. It's not increasing the supply. You're not making more pizza by cutting it into smaller slices, but the famous one.
Yeah.
But, people assume that the price that it's at right now is going to be the same, but I mean, that hasn't been the case, and I don't think that's really ever going to be the case. Every time we get a halving, the value of the block subsidy is just drastically more, even though you're getting half the amount of Bitcoin every halving. I forgot where I was going with the second half of that, but that's that's a huge part. And sorry, I completely lost the train of thought that I was going on there.
I was going to say, just to your point there, but I think what you were getting at is essentially, even though we keep seeing, roughly every 4 years, every 210,000 blocks, the subsidy getting cut in half, but the amount of revenue in terms of US dollars or other measures of value has been increasing for miners. So even though the subsidy is going down, the miners are getting more, which tells you all you need to know.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. Good stuff, gents.
So he's saying that that the high fees would make it impossible for most users to use Bitcoin. This is an argument that the big blockers make, and I don't necessarily, even though again big blockers have a really stupid solution to the problem, I don't necessarily think that making that it's a bad argument. I do think that the solution that they come up with is bad, but absolutely, I do think that it depends how why the fees are higher. If the fees are higher because the whole entire world is doing commerce on Bitcoin, that's not an issue. That's not a problem. But if the fees are higher because the blocks are empty, and because there's some sort of a minor attack, or the blocks are filled with junk and nobody can get their actual transactions through, I think that's a bad thing. So it just depends why the fees are higher. If the fees are higher because the price of Bitcoin has gone up, and or the purchasing power of Bitcoin has gone up, and so it's more expensive to transact because a Bitcoin is actually worth more, that's actually good. If the fees are higher because more and more people are actually going onto a Bitcoin standard, that's good. It just depends. But you have to say, just because Bitcoin winning means the fees go up doesn't necessarily mean the fees go up mean that Bitcoin is winning. So yes, it depends what caused the fees to spike. And I do think that a lot of people in the Bitcoin space are actually starting to be concerned about high fees. And sometimes I get accused of being a big blocker, which is funny because I've actually read a lot of big blocker arguments, and I've read Roger Vere's book. I actually reached out to Roger Ver, and he sent me a copy of his book for free, Hijacking Bitcoin. And I actually read through the book, and he actually him as a big blocker actually makes the opposite case that I'm making. He's saying that the block should be used for all sorts of things. They should be used for information, and they should be altcoins on top of the Bitcoin layer. So it seems to me like the big blockers are definitely on the side of wanting to fill Bitcoin blocked with everything but actual monetary transactions. Hope I'm not saying anything too controversial here.
No,
that all sounds pretty good, Pat.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting when people suggest, raising the block space, allowing for like a larger block size, and then also cramming other things into Bitcoin. And, there's a lot of people that believe that inscriptions and ordinals, like transactions for ordinals, are spam, and that we should filter them out. And I don't think there's anyone proposing forks to completely eliminate the possibility of them being included in a block. But when you add more block space, when you allow for more things, like let's just say we want to store like all my Word documents on the Bitcoin blockchain because I don't want to lose them, and that's just the most secure network, right? Like there's really no limit hypothetically to what we could store on a blockchain that allows for data to be put there. And that, but at the same time, that kind of completely eliminates the usability of it, because it becomes
absolutely. So real quickly, I mean, it's a very close parallel to the argument that was being made in the 60s and 70s, which is when traffic was becoming a problem in cities. The argument was, no problem, we just build more roads, we build more highways, and that will fix the traffic problem. And what we found is that by building more and more roads, you're actually causing the traffic to be worse and worse, because you have something called induced demand. So I've heard people, Luke is one of them, and there have been other people who are kind of agreeing with Luke nowadays more and more so. I've heard people argue that we should decrease the block space. The argument being that it's not being used as is for the transactions. It's just being filled with a bunch of stuff that isn't really related to Bitcoin. So yes, if you increase the block space, it's going to be filled more and more with junk. I think that's also a very good argument. And I think the traffic argument is a good one. I think it's because it kind of fits, because people don't think this anymore. Nowadays, people say, if you just build more roads, it's not going to fix the traffic. In fact, they've actually discovered accidentally that taking roads away actually improves traffic flow. And this is completely counterintuitive, but it's happened in Seattle and in Los Angeles. Things like this have happened where they closed the 405 freeway in LA, and they closed some big bridge in Seattle because for repairs, and they were warning all sorts of problems were going to happen, and it was going to be a catastrophe. And it turned out that traffic actually improved in the city when those things happened. And it's actually dawning on people that maybe increasing roads doesn't actually fix traffic. And a lot of places are actually taking, in fact, where I'm living right now, there's a main street, a few streets back, where they took lanes away and they added bike lanes. And when that happened, a lot of people complained. They said, why are they taking away lanes of cars and adding bike lanes? And it's funny because no one's actually using those bike lanes, but the traffic on that street has actually improved, even though to this day, you're more likely to see someone pushing a stroller down the bike lane than you are to see a bike down there. In fact, there was actually a viral video where they were showing bicyclists on that street, and the bicyclists themselves weren't using the bike lane. They were all crowded up onto the road, and they were like, hey, we just spent all this money building these bike lanes for these bicyclists, and they're not even using the bike lane. But but still traffic improved because sometimes a road diet actually improves traffic. And I think this is what the big blockers miss. They're like a five-year-old who says, oh, just build more roads and it's going to fix the problem. And it never does.
Yeah. Patrick, just to yes and your point there as well too. What I was reminded of is essentially the same argument for price controls. Like your assumption is that everything else will stay the exact same and the equilibrium won't rebalance if you get in there and start fucking with the system. Like if you just artificially push transaction fees down by increasing the block space, people's behavior will change and adjust.
Yeah. I think that analogy with the roads was pretty spot on. And I want to kind of take what we're talking about right now and shift it to maybe like a white pill. Like maybe we could talk a little bit about what people can do when fees go up, maybe some wallets, things like Lightning, Liquid. What are you guys typically using or telling people to use if, fees go up? Maybe we could just touch on some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually learned my lesson because last year I was trying to send a transaction that had like 50 UTXOs, and it was right in the middle of the worst of the spam attacks. So I was basically screwed. So I've learned my lesson, and what I'm doing these days to mitigate that is I'm just if I have too many UTXOs, I kind of keep an eye on the on the traffic, basically on the traffic report, and when it's low, I do a consolidation. So next time when I have to send Bitcoin and it's in the middle of like a really bad traffic jam or spam attack, I'm able to do so without paying paying an arm, a leg, and my firstborn. So that's one lesson I've learned is just UTXO management, and it's actually not that difficult to learn. It's actually super simple. I've kind of taught this to my mom, and she understood it. She understood. Oh, okay, I get it. It's a UTXO. You're just combining them so that it's easier to send in the future. So it's not a complicated topic. I remember the first time I heard the word UTXO, it was like from an Andreas Antonopoulos speech, and I had to look it up. What does UTXO mean? I actually typed in UTXO, and then I kind of went down this rabbit hole of trying to learn kind of the nitty gritty of Bitcoin behind the scenes. But that's what I do. And yeah, obviously Liquid and Lightning are also a solution. I've started using those more and more as well.
Yeah, and I think that what I like to do is keep a bookmark tab on my computer of mempool.space. If anyone listening isn't aware of that website, they offer using their mempool, the average fees that it's taking to get included into the next block. If you just check on this maybe every day or so and get an idea of where the fees are at on a regular average basis, and then you'll be more in tune with, okay, right now, because I've been looking at it, I've noticed that the fees right now to get into the next block are really low. I mean, like it's 7 sats per VByte, maybe 10 or 11 some days, which translates to less than $1. And that's for a single UTXO and would allow for even small transactions like a $10 worth of Bitcoin transaction to go through, and you're only spending like 10% or less of the Bitcoin in that transaction to be sent. But there are certain days that I noticed just recently within the last week or so where there was some kind of spam attack and they're minting some kind of BRC20 token where the fees jumped for like a couple hours up into the $100+ range. And if you have a $50 Bitcoin UTXO and the fees to get into the next couple blocks is $100, you can't spend that UTXO by itself. You would need to pull from another UTXO to spend that $50. So imagine having to send $50, you have to spend $100. It's like, well, where are you getting that $100 from? So this is like the idea of the UTXOs is that you want them to be a sufficient size so that they're able to pay for the fees themselves. And that I've typically recommended people is to be about 1 million sats, which is about $600 right now. And that can be done through buying on an exchange, waiting until you're at that 1 million sat threshold, and then moving it off, or maybe moving into Liquid or Lightning, and then on converting that, swapping that to on-chain Bitcoin once it reaches that 1 million sat mark. There's a bunch of different ways you can do it, but like I said, keeping an idea of like where the mempool's at, where the fees are at on a daily basis, you don't get afraid when you see it like, oh, I need to spend some Bitcoin right now. It's like $50 for a transaction. That's probably an anomaly right now, like because you're aware of the norm and what we've been seeing.
Yeah, and I just threw up in the chat, Bull Bitcoin's got a fee multiple where they just kind of give you historic averages to give you an idea roughly if these are currently cheap or expensive and where they are, so you can take that information and compare it there as well too. And Patrick, just expanding upon what you were saying earlier too, for anyone that's not familiar, and you haven't really dug down into fees and how they work, the thing for me that really helped me understand everything that was going on was just getting a cursory knowledge of what's included in a transaction. So for anyone who's not familiar, your fees associated with your transaction are not based on the value or the amount of Bitcoin. They're based on the amount of data that's going in. And essentially, your transaction is going to have inputs. It's going to have an unlocking script. It's going to have outputs and a locking script. And so to Patrick's earlier point with those like 50 UTXOs, those are 50 inputs going in. So the more data, the more inputs that have to be included, the more you're going to have to pay to fit that into the next block.
100%. That's the number one thing I was a misconception that I was saying. Well, it's $5 a transaction, and then people were assuming, if you're sending $100, it's $5. Therefore, if you're sending $10,000, it's $50 or $500. It's like no. If it's still $5, whether you're sending $1 or if you're sending $100,000, as long as the data is the same, it's not based on the value. So that is an important distinction that sometimes people miss when they say, oh, $5 a transaction, that means it's 5%. Therefore, if it's $1,000, it's $50. No, that's not the case.
Yeah, that's like I said, all comes down to the UTXOs and understanding how you're receiving Bitcoin, whether that's through merchant services, like you're maybe a shop or you're selling a good or service and you're receiving Bitcoin. If you're receiving on-chain Bitcoin, you're getting $10 at a time, or you're buying from an exchange and you're sending to your hardware wallet or your phone wallet, your hot wallet, $10 at a time, $20 at a time. You're creating those size UTXOs because each one of those is going to come in as their own UTXO, and sending $10 UTXOs versus one $100 is going to be more in fees for that former transaction than the latter. So UTXO management, highly recommend anybody that is not aware of that stuff to watch some tutorials, look that stuff up. Definitely, it's a little bit of a rabbit hole to go down, but really not that complicated, like Pat said. Totally able to get your head around. I also just want to touch on a popular wallet that I've liked to use in recent times is Aqua Wallet. It's on the phone. It is a hot wallet, but it allows people to receive Lightning and then it auto swaps to Liquid. So you're always holding Liquid Bitcoin or on-chain Bitcoin if you want to receive an on-chain transaction, and lets you also send out and pay a Lightning invoice with your Liquid stash on the phone. So it allows interoperability with Liquid, Lightning, and you also have that on-chain feature. It's self-custodial. You're not relying on someone else holding the funds for you. Great tool for people that just want to use it for maybe some spending money and just testing out, playing around with. I think it's great. You guys have anything you want to add or?
No, I completely agree. And it's similar to Aqua. I've enjoyed Green Wallet from Blockstream, but I do like the ability to swap within the wallet in Aqua. And similar to Aqua, Bull Bitcoin has their Bull app as well too. And same sort of setup. It's that interoperability between Lightning and Liquid, which is great for those UTXOs, purchases, and small change. Things kind of under 1 million sats. I like keeping in that.
Yeah, second that, huge fan of Aqua Wallet. I started using it about a month ago, and I'm a huge fan now. I love it. It's one of my favorite wallets to use for day-to-day small transactions. And one thing that I heard my friend Bitcoin Mechanic say, which kind of helped explain the UTXO thing, is that if you have like what Ed was saying, with 10 UTXOs of $10 each versus one UTXO of $100, the reason why it's so much cheaper to send one UTXO of $100 rather than 10 of 10 is because each of those UTXOs has to be like a journal entry. So you need to have someone record what happens to each of those 10 UTXOs one by one. Whereas if it's one UTXO of $100, there's only one journal entry. This is why it takes up so much less space. This is why it's so much cheaper. This is why it's so much easier to kind of consolidate your UTXOs during periods of less traffic. It's kind of like when, if you can decide to go to the store any time of day, you don't want to go to the store right when everyone else is at the store and you have to wait in a long line at the checkout counter. You can go like early in the morning or later at night, when there's fewer people in the store, and you can, you're going to be able to just walk right up to the checkout as soon as you're done shopping. It's kind of the same thing. You're just kind of waiting for when the fees are cheap and just consolidate your UTXOs. It's super easy, and you kind of defeat all this FUD around bigger blocks and 6 transactions per second, all that nonsense FUD that you hear about Bitcoin, which is not true.
Yeah, and the idea is if you have a bunch of small UTXOs right now and fees are low, you're going to have to spend those UTXOs. So you're going to have to take that initial hit and combine or consolidate what we call those UTXOs into a larger one. But the idea is that you do that now while the fees are low, or you wait until the fees are low, so that in the future, when you want to spend that Bitcoin, you're spending from that larger UTXO. And there's also, the trade-off to consider with the privacy. You don't want to consolidate your UTXO into maybe thousands of dollars if you're planning on only spending the 1 million sats at a time. Maybe you just want a couple million sat UTXOs instead of like an entire Bitcoin in a UTXO. So these things have to be considered. But yeah, the idea is consolidating, biting that bullet, and then getting ready for the future, preparing and getting ready. Gary, was there anything else that you want to add? We haven't touched on you in a while. He might not be
Yeah, I was saying he's on mute for me, or I'm not hearing anything. Gary, yes, anything you want to add?
Hey, Gary. Sorry, I put it on here. No, I mean, if I encounter high fees and, I can't send anything, I just draw a picture, email that, and I say I value the picture at whatever the money is, and I consider the matter closed. So it seems to solve it.
Creative solution.
Oh, yes. The Pablo Picasso method. I'll pay my restaurant bill with a napkin drawing.
By the way, I wish I could claim original credit for that one, but it was from something that I saw on the internet like 15 years ago about a guy who owed money to, I think, the local electric company, and he responded with a drawing of a spider, and he says, "I value the spider at exactly $278.33. The amount of money I owe, I now consider the matter closed."
Oh wow!
Oh, that's awesome. Just a reminder for anybody in the audience, if you want to come up, ask a question, talk to us, that'd be fantastic. We'd love to have you here. I know we're getting a little closer to the top of the clock. I actually had a thought today that I kind of want to bounce off you guys, if you don't mind me changing directions for a second. Yeah. I saw the announcement about Bull Bitcoin in France, and what I was kind of thinking about was this idea of specialization in terms of stores and services. So even for me, I get my meat from one place, my produce from one place, my milk from another place. I don't go to the giant, buy everything at Walmart places anymore. And I was starting to think if perhaps these superstores is kind of, because they're access to cheap capital and these things as well too, and it's kind of a offshoot of the fiat world that we're living in. And as we move maybe more onto a Bitcoin standard, as we'll see specialization be valued more, and you won't have these kind of catch-all shops, catch-all services. I'm just curious what you guys think.
I've seen that argument made that in a world moving away from fiat, where just spending your money and getting it out of your hands before it loses value stops being a regular everyday thing that people deal with, there'll be a return to, craftsmanship and pride in detail and sturdiness over time. I mean, I can see the argument. Will it unfold that way? I don't know, but the argument makes sense to me.
I definitely have this idea, and it might just be wishful thinking, that when people have a robust and effective savings technology like Bitcoin, that their time and energy and their mental energy will be taken away from worrying about money and finances, when they know that this Bitcoin stash that they've developed will go up in value, and it has gone up in value for them, that they can focus on their craft and they can focus on these things. And I think that it was definitely touched on in the Bitcoin standard as far as architecture and just art and beauty in the modern world. I think that we're severely lacking in all those things. And I think that it 100% is an effect of people having short-term views and mindsets because their money is just being devalued so quickly, and they're worrying about, some people are even worried about just getting food for the month, and they can't even afford that necessarily, and they're working extra just to keep the roof over their head, and they're worried about foreclosures, and there's all these things that people stress about because their money just does not hold value, especially if you have noticed in the last couple of years, the inflation that we've been witnessing in every country is just really crushing for people. So I'm hoping that, the people I've seen in Bitcoin start becoming concerned with these things and start saying, you know what, I'm really good at this particular skill or trade. And now that I have my money sorted out and I have all these lower needs taken care of, what can I do to like help maybe my local city or my just the culture of my town or my city or my country, and elevate everybody to a higher level and get things beautiful again, like make things beautiful and make things make people just appreciate like the skill and like instead of buying a chair from Target or IKEA, you can get some like handcrafted like beautiful chair that every time you look at and you sit in, you're just overwhelmed with the beauty of it. Maybe I'm kind of going on a rant with it, but I really think that like everything in our modern lives is just so ugly and depressing that like little things like that, if you can add that to your life and people start providing that for people, can really transform society.
Ed, to build off that idea, if I kind of just game it out in my head, and again, it's not a well flushed out idea, it was just something I was thinking about looking at all these Bitcoin only companies. That's all they do. If Bitcoin frees up more time for me by protecting my purchasing power, right, and then hopefully improve my productivity and stuff like that. If Bitcoin gives me more time and I'm going to be more cautious about spending it for that reason as well too, then I would think that I would be more choosy about what I do purchase and then want to have that emphasis on quality and beauty, like you've mentioned. And I'd have the time to go and hit those different stores. I wouldn't be in such a rush to get the cheapest possible thing for the shortest amount of time.
Yeah. I mean, I have noticed myself playing that in my head. I'll look at some like piece of furniture or something that I'm like, oh, I kind of need that. And I can't justify spending, Bitcoin or that kind of like savings that I know will be more valuable in the future. Like it is going to be more valuable in my opinion on something that's just ugly. Like I just can't justify that. And sometimes you just, it's not even just necessarily, there's the meme like, oh, you still have a chair, like sell your chair and buy Bitcoin. It's like, well, yes, you should sell your ugly chairs at least, and maybe get one like really nice chair that you can sit in and it's comfortable, it's beautiful, and you like it, and that could be with multiple things in your life, but it's not going to be this ugly thing. And then you just feel guilty. You're like, oh, it's just depressing, and it's, not elevating my spirit. And I could have held on to this money. I didn't really need it,
100%. Get rid of the ugly chairs, folks. Get only the beautiful chairs. And you only need one good one to sit in. Just quickly, I wanted to make a note. I saw that Steve was down in the audience and made a request to come up there briefly. I may have hit the wrong button, Steve, but if you did have a question you want to come up, just hit that request again. Gary, what are your thoughts?
I think our time is almost up. So, unless Steve wants to jump up and contribute something, the main takeaway from our last hour should be buy good chairs.
Yes, only the best chairs will do.
Yep, that's it.
I'd be fine if people took that away from what I was saying. Oh, we got Steve coming up now. I just added him. Hey, Steve. You're on mute.
Hey,
I don't
Steve.
know if
on mute here. Yeah, my question. There we go. And my question was, what I'm having all the time is a hard time. Like you guys were almost saying, where you want to go buy something. I find that I will think more heavily on that a little bit more because that Bitcoin in the future is going to raise, appreciate so much. So I find that you actually think differently than you would like our our normal times when we use credit cards or something like that, it was, oh, let's go get it. Where now your mentality goes, oh, I could, save those few dollars, and instead of them being, $100 for that chair or $50 for that chair, in another 2 years, that chair is going to be now worth, if that Bitcoin is going to be worth X amount of dollars. So that's something that I've noticed myself, where I just save more because you just know it's going to be worth more in a period of time. My other question was, where I'd like to get more, I'm more on a Bitcoin standard now, but what I find is, because right now it's actually nice because it's going sideways, but with the fluctuate, when it goes up so much, it works well. But when it comes down and then you've put all your money into your shitty money into Bitcoin or into, I normally put it into like liquid and it's easier to use kind of thing. But then to go pay bills and stuff, that bill almost becomes more expensive almost. So I'd like to get on to more using Bitcoin more often. And so the system itself will maneuver, but it's hard to do when you're almost losing in some sense.
Yeah, I think that it's important to have the frame of being profitable, whether that's a job you go to or business you run, earning more than you have in expenses. And if that's maybe you have to denominate, if you're accepting Bitcoin as your money, denominate it in your local currency that your expenses are denominated in, so that you're able to raise the amount of Bitcoin that you need to match that fiat value in the services. That way you're not worried about making those payments, but living lean, like you said, like you're kind of already thinking twice about buying something that you might not need or that is a little frivolous. And if your expenses are under your income, then that hypothetically wouldn't be an issue. And then the Bitcoin that you have stockpiled away, if it goes down in fiat value, isn't an issue either. But people get into the trap of having loans and debt for so many different things that can be a little scary, because now if they're drawing from their savings and they have to pay this debt and their savings just got devalued against that fiat that it's denominated in, then yeah, you're in a tough spot. But did you guys have anything you wanted to add to that? Did that kind of answer the question?
One thing. I know this isn't directly what he meant by the question, but what Steve said was very interesting. He said that if he's thinking on a Bitcoin standard, he's less likely to spend money on something frivolous, and maybe for the reasons that it takes up space too. I mean, like if you buy too many chairs, now where are you going to put them all? You have to think about maybe getting a storage. So absolutely, and to where this conversation started about an hour ago was people, there was a guy who was saying that Bitcoin was bad for the environment. I've always made the exact opposite argument. If you're on a sound money standard instead of a money standard where consumers are being urged to go out there and consume and buy things that are going to break in 5 years so they can go out and buy another one, and things aren't built to last anymore. If you're on that type of a standard, that's actually bad for the environment. I get so upset when I hear 100%. About companies like Apple doing all this greenwashing nonsense that isn't going to do anything good for the environment, and they claim like, oh, we're making these materials with a allergen-free substance, which has no bearing on anything, or they're planting some trees, which has no bearing on anything. But at the same time, the second there's one small thing that goes wrong with your iPad, they immediately just tell you, oh, just buy a new one, and they're kind of pushing you to just buy a new one, which is absolutely the worst thing. Hey, if you want to make Apple an environmentally friendly company, why don't you make something that will actually last, and you can replace the battery and it doesn't break after 3 years, and you don't have to go out and buy a brand new one each time. That would actually be good for the environment. But we're kind of in this mindset where consumerism mindset where, and it's not people's fault. It's not the consumer's fault. This is what I try to say, and maybe I disagree with Saifedean on this, is it's not the consumer's fault if they're going out and spending money, because that's the monetary system we live under. You're incentivized to go out and spend your money and not save. Whereas if you're thinking on a Bitcoin standard, you're actually more incentivized to save and not spend money and not buy a brand new car every 3 years, which is actually bad for the environment, and kind of, try to make sure your older car runs longer. that's actually good for the environment. So in my opinion, Bitcoin is actually great for the environment. And on a second point, it's not necessarily a bad point that Steve is making. If especially in a place like Venezuela, I haven't not Venezuela, El Salvador. I haven't actually been there, but I've talked to people who have, and they say that that the people there are very receptive to Bitcoin, but at the same time, most of the time they prefer dollars because it's more stable for them. So the recommendation I heard was when you're paying for things, pay in dollars. However, you can tip them in Bitcoin, and they will know how to accept it. Like your cab driver will know how to accept a tip in Bitcoin. The fruit stand seller or whoever will know how to accept a tip in Bitcoin. So you can give them, so you can pay them in dollars, so that they are they know that they can pay their bills for that month, for that week. But at the same time, you can give them something extra in Bitcoin. So I guess if that's analogous to what you or I would do, we would put aside the amount that we need to pay for our bills in dollars or Canadian dollars or whatever our local currency is, and make sure those are covered. And then whatever extra we have that we know we're not going to need right away, we can save that for a number of years. We can save that in Bitcoin. So Bitcoin can sometimes be your long-term savings account, unless you're specifically buying something in Bitcoin from a Bitcoiner who's happy to accept your Bitcoin. Hope that answers your question, Steve.
So if I may jump in and add to what Patrick was saying and what Steve brought up, that the idea of you've invested in some Bitcoin and it's gone up and that's great, or even if it's just gone horizontally and held its value relative to fiat, but there are some times where it goes down and now you find yourself not being able to pay a bill. I totally get that. And it sort of goes back to something that we were talking about at the very beginning with this guy who was critiquing Bitcoin. And one of the things he wrote, I'll just read it for you, is Bitcoin is not widely accepted as payment for goods or services and must be converted into another currency first. I do not accept Bitcoin in return for my services at work or as rent, and I cannot easily use Bitcoin to purchase goods and services nor pay my taxes. And whether we like it or not, we still sort of live in a fiat world. I know all of us here are trying to move it more towards a Bitcoin world, and I'm on board with that too, and that's great. And I would love for it to be a currency and use it easily in everyday life, but we're not there yet. So when I talk to friends who are maybe against Bitcoin or tentatively thinking of dipping their toes in, or even people who were gung-ho investors and think they might make a quick buck, I do tell them, if you are going in and you're trying to get out in 6 months with a quick buck, or even a year or even 2 years, and thinking you're going to make a lot of money off of this, if you think you can time it right and pull it off, you are a smarter man than I, because I do not know when the ups and downs are coming. So if you are prepared to leave that money in over 4, 5, even 10-year periods and just be okay with it, I promise you 99.999%, again, I never say 100, you will feel good about doing that and you'll be much better off. But if you're going in trying to make a quick buck and you're not leaving yourself enough of a cushion of fiat dollars in our fiat world, I would personally advise against that.
It's like I just want to quickly add too, before we wrap up on that one as well, is that if you're for someone like maybe like Ben, who was hanging here a little bit earlier, if you're being paid in Bitcoin, in terms of getting and you're producing more than you're consuming, then in terms of, satisfying all your liabilities, all your bills and things, you won't have any issues as long as you're not denominated in Bitcoin. So that's kind of where there's a little bit of a gray area there. So if you're paid in Bitcoin, but it's denominated in something else, then you'd never have an issue living off it, because the amount would just adjust to the pre-agreed upon amount.
Fair, yes.
Did that help you out, Steve?
Yeah, that helped it a lot.
Right.
Because that was the big thing, is what I was doing is not so much. So a lot of times, that's what I like about like Numchuck or Keeper, is you can create a bunch of different wallets kind of thing. So if you want to like put a lump sum down on your mortgage, or a lump sum down on your vehicle, or add extra money, or you just name it whatever you want to name it. And then you can just, I'd like to see them do that more in, like create wallets like that in Liquid as well. So that's not so expensive to move around a little bit. But that's where that comes in handy, because then you can just store away that money in there, and it just keeps growing and growing until, one day you see it's up or whatever. And then you just put a nice big chunk on, you can convert it back over your currency, and then And then,
well, Steve, I would be careful with that. I wouldn't use Liquid for long-term storage. To me, Liquid is like what you would put in your wallet or your checking account. So if it's for long-term storage, I recommend getting it out of Liquid. But yes, you can keep some money in Liquid just to, so that you can easily spend it for, short-term, what you would be comfortable walking around in your wallet or in your checking account.
Yes, true. That's where I look at Lightning more as my wallet, and Liquid I find is more my bank. And then gold is my Bitcoin itself in the cold storage. But that's well,
awesome.
That's what I.
Glad we could help. Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, I'm going to wrap up the space for today, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Are you good? Okay. Yeah. So I'm going to wrap the space for today. Thanks everybody for coming. Make sure you give all the guys up here a follow. We're all Bitcoin mentors. And if you want to check out Bitcoin Mentor, you can go to bitcoinmentor.io and you can email us or book a free session and we can help you with self-custody, running a node, anything technical Bitcoin related. We do this space every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern time. We are going to be taking Monday off for Labor Day. A bunch of us are preoccupied. We have plans. So we're going to see you guys next Wednesday. And we're looking forward to chatting next time. Have a great weekend, guys, and enjoy the holiday.
Later, guys. Have a good weekend.